to be with his mistress, my husband was willing to destroy both me and our daughter. But when I ripped away the mask and laid bare who she truly was, his scream. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a hospital bed, my arm numb from the IV needle buried deep in my vein. The dull white light from the ceiling lamp shone down, everything around me blurred, like a bad dream. Today was the day John asked me for a divorce. It all started when I went to the luxury store where Sarah Evans worked. I walked in with rage boiling in my chest, yanked her from behind the counter, and right there in the middle of the mall's hallway, under the harsh neon lights and the hum of a curious crowd, I exposed everything filthy between her and John. My voice cut sharp through the air, each word like a knife. Messages, secret meetings, the things she had done to my daughter. Sarah cried, tears streaking down her perfectly made-up face, her hands trembling as she dialed him. John appeared as fast as a shadow, rushing over to stand in front of her, shielding her like she was some fragile treasure. His face flushed red, his eyes lit with fury. "Sophie, stop acting crazy," he barked, his voice loud enough to make the crowd freeze and stare. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the pain of being betrayed yet again. How could he still protect her after everything she'd done to hurt our child? I lunged at him, my nails clawing at his arm, trying to drag him away from her. But John shoved me hard, his strength like a violent wave. My head slammed against the wall with a sharp, dry thud, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was here, on this hospital bed, with the sharp smell of antiseptic and the steady beeping of machines. The door opened and John walked in, his steps heavy. He avoided my eyes, staring out the window where the late sunlight filtered through the thin curtains. His face was cold, his lips pressed tight. "Sophie, let's get a divorce," he said, his voice flat, like he was reading a report. I lay there, trying to sit up as the pounding in my head made me dizzy. "So, because I exposed Sarah, you want a divorce?" I asked, my voice hoarse, trying to keep calm even as fury churned inside me. He wouldn't look at me, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. "What's between us has nothing to do with Sarah. Look at yourself. Out of shape, no job, always picking fights over petty things. Who could put up with that?" His words stabbed into my chest, each one painfully familiar, predictable. Of course, it was the same old refrain, painting me as worthless. I thought to myself how he'd once said, "Honey, our daughter needs you. I need you. Quit your job." Back then, it was sweet as honey. Now it was just a bitter joke. Family used to be my whole world. I quit my job, became a housewife, cleaning the house, cooking warm meals, caring for Emma with all my love. I thought that was enough, that our love would be solid. But when I learned John was cheating, I spiraled into panic, crying and begging him not to leave me. He didn't waver. His face stayed blank as he moved straight out to live with Sarah. He let her send me photo after photo of them together. Kisses, hugs, like knives digging into an unhealed wound. Every phone notification was another stab, making me flinch, wondering what I'd done wrong. But I never imagined Sarah's jealousy and obsession would indirectly hurt my daughter. That was the deepest, sharpest pain, the one that shattered everything. That day, John took Emma to his place for dinner, saying it was to celebrate his mother's birthday. I suspected nothing, smiled, smoothed my daughter's hair, and let him take her. Emma waved goodbye, her little face beaming. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was the police. Their voice was cold as they told me Emma had fallen from John's apartment and was in emergency care. My heart stopped. I bolted from the house, my legs trembling as I drove to the hospital. When I got there, I saw her small body in the ER, tubes everywhere, machines beeping nonstop. She no longer ran to hug me, no longer called Mommy, no longer clung to me. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, like a discarded doll. I sat by her bed, my hands trembling as I touched her cold fingers, tears streaming endlessly. This was my daughter, my own flesh and blood, lying here because of someone else's selfishness. John said he'd gone downstairs to buy cigarettes, that his mother was cooking in the kitchen, and Emma had climbed out the window on her own. He wept, tears rolling down his face, as if his pain matched mine. But I didn't believe him. Emma was 7. How could she not know danger? She was always careful, always asked me before doing anything risky. I looked at him. His eyes red, but deep inside I saw avoidance, and it made me suspicious. I went to the building's management to review the security footage, my heart pounding with the hope of finding the truth. And then I saw it. Half an hour after Emma's fall, Sarah walked out of the building, blending into the crowd gathered outside, her face pale before she hurried away. She was there. She had to be involved. I clutched my phone, ready to call the police, but suddenly it was snatched away. John, who was the building manager, stood in front of me, his face twisted, quickly deleting the footage. "Sophie, Sarah didn't do anything. Stop causing trouble. It was just an accident," he said, calm as if talking about the weather. I stared at him in shock, unable to believe he could lie so easily. "John, Emma is your own daughter," I screamed, clawing at his shirt, my nails digging into his skin. "You're not human! You're not human!" Pain and rage mixed, spinning me out of control, my tears and screams tangled together. John dragged me outside and hurled me to the cold concrete floor. He pointed at me, snarling, "If you cause trouble again, don't blame me for being rough." His face twisted with anger, but I wasn't afraid. I stood, wiped my tears, and like a madwoman, I stormed toward where Sarah worked, rage guiding my steps toward the moment that would seal everything at the mall. John's voice cut through, yanking me out of the chaos of my thoughts. "If you agree to the divorce, I'll tell Sarah not to press charges or call the police to have you arrested." He stood there at the foot of my hospital bed, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine as if the floor was more interesting than my face. The matching ring on his finger glinted under the harsh hospital lights, a bitter reminder of what we once were. I stared at the ring and laughed, a hoarse, bitter sound. Just an hour earlier, I had learned a secret, a truth. If John knew Sarah was actually Grayson Martinez, the very pervert he once cursed out and cut off, would he lose his mind? I pictured his face twisted, his eyes wide with shock, and that thought made my chest feel a little lighter. I was looking forward to that day. "Fine, I agree to the divorce," I said, my voice unsettlingly calm. John's head shot up, surprise flickering in his eyes, his brows lifting as if he couldn't believe I could be so decisive. He must have thought I would cry, beg like before, but that Sophie was gone. I met his gaze, my lips pressed tight. "But," I continued, "the house and the car are mine. Emma stays with me, and every month you will pay me $2,000, not a single cent less." John's face flushed crimson, his fists clenching as if he wanted to punch the air. "You're dreaming," he snapped. "If I give you the house, where will Sarah and I live? I only make a little over $5,000 a month. If I give you $2,000, how are we supposed to survive?" I smirked, my voice cold as ice. "I don't care if you end up on the streets." The words came out sharp, without a shred of hesitation. I had never raised my voice to John before. He froze, mouth slightly open, as if he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, lowering my voice but sharpening it. Your Sarah has sent me more than enough bedroom videos of you two. If you don't agree, we'll see each other in court. I put extra weight on court to make sure he understood I wasn't bluffing. John's face darkened, his teeth grinding, but in the end he nodded, his shoulders sagging like a man defeated. I knew I'd won this round, not for the money, but because for the first time I had made him bow his head. On the day of the divorce, I walked out of the courthouse into the stifling August heat clinging to my skin. Sarah rushed into John's arms, her face lit with a triumphant smile under layers of makeup. She shot me a glance, her eyes glittering with arrogance, then kissed his cheek loudly, making sure I could hear, "Honey, you're finally free from that woman." I stood there, arms crossed, watching her tilt her chin in challenge. "Sophie, I'll give you one day to move out of the house." I gave a slow, sly smile that stopped Sarah in her tracks. "Didn't your husband tell you that house is mine now?" I enunciated each word, savoring the moment her expression shifted from smug to unsettled. She leapt from John's arms, whipping her head toward him, her voice trembling. "John, why would you give her the house?" I pulled my car keys from my pocket, spinning them lazily around my finger as I said, "Not just the house, the car too." "What?" Sarah's voice cracked into a shout, the pitch slipping, faintly masculine. John didn't notice. He was too busy irritably tapping his phone to book a ride. But Sarah, or Grayson, was sharper than I'd expected. She picked up on John's annoyance instantly, slipping into a fragile act, clinging to his arm, her tone syrupy. "Honey, I truly love you. Even without a house, without a car, I'll always be with you." John softened, pulling her into an embrace, then turned to jab at me. "My Sarah is so good, unlike some people who only care about money." I didn't answer. I simply started my car, the engine's low growl like a statement. I opened the back door and tossed Sarah's scattered belongings, lipstick, a scarf, a cheap bottle of perfume, onto the curb. "Wish you two happiness and a baby soon," I said, locking eyes with her, catching the flicker of unease that passed over her face. I knew her secret, and that glance confirmed it. She didn't know how much I knew, but the fear had already seeped into her eyes. I drove off without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I saw John and Sarah standing there, she clinging to him, he looking down, silent. My hands gripped the wheel, the feeling of freedom swelling in my chest, like it was the first time in years I could truly breathe. Emma was waiting for me, and I was going to rebuild everything, for her and for myself. Back at the house, I found a package left on the doorstep from the private investigator I had hired. I tore through the wrapping, and inside was a thick stack of documents, the pages whispering against my fingers. I sat down on the sofa, the soft yellow light falling over the printed lines. Sarah Evans, or rather, she was actually Grayson Martinez. Grayson had been John's high school classmate. They had gotten into the same university, studied the same major, walked the same path. When John and I were dating, Grayson was always there, quietly tagging along on our outings, his eyes fixed on John as if I were nothing more than a faint shadow. Once, John asked me to set Grayson up with a girl. But in the middle of the restaurant, Grayson suddenly erupted, pointing at John and demanding to know if I was the reason John wanted to push him away. His words, sharp and strange, startled me. I half joked to John, "Do you think Grayson likes you?" John laughed loudly, dismissing my crazy thoughts. But later, the truth proved me right. One night, Grayson, drunk out of his mind, called John to pick him up. By dawn, John returned home looking dazed, his hair a mess as if he'd run from a nightmare. When I asked what happened, he muttered angrily, calling Grayson a pervert. While John had been asleep, Grayson had kissed him and tried to take off his clothes. John clung to me, his voice trembling. "Babe, thank God I woke up in time, or else—" "Damn it," I teased. "Grayson treats you so well. If he were a woman, you'd probably be smitten." John shuddered, shaking his head. "Just the thought makes me sick. That would never happen." I never imagined my joke would become reality. According to the file, 10 years ago, Grayson had traveled to Southeast Asia for gender reassignment surgery. That was also the year he cut off contact with John. The operation had been long and expensive, far beyond what someone fresh out of school could afford. I flipped further and found old bank statements from a decade ago. One account had been transferring money to Grayson for an entire year, totaling over $1 million. The account holder was the owner of a nightclub that was later shut down for shady allegations. My lips tightened, my finger pausing on the page. What had Grayson sold to become the Sarah of today? That truth made my skin crawl. I kept reading, each line stringing together pieces of his past. His father had left him and his mother when Grayson was young, moving in with another man. His mother, to raise him, became a prostitute, the kind of work society despises. At school, Grayson had been mocked, bullied, and isolated. John, in a passing moment of kindness, had stepped in to defend him, standing between him and the cruel boys. Just one small act, but for Grayson, John became the only light in his dark world. I understood why Grayson loved John to the point of obsession, but that did not excuse what he had done. He had destroyed my marriage. He had left Emma, my daughter, lying motionless in the ER. He was pitiful, but 1,000 times more despicable. I closed the file, locked it away in a drawer, a chill running down my spine. I opened my laptop and listed the house for sale on real estate sites, each click like slicing through the last thread tying me to John. I didn't want that house anymore, or the dust-covered memories of a broken family. I called my mother, arranging to move Emma to a hospital in California where my parents lived. I wanted her safe, far from John's reach. Sitting in the quiet room, the laptop's glow lit my face, reflecting eyes tired yet icy. I would wait, silent, patient, like a hunter. I wanted John to discover Sarah's secret himself, to face the truth that the woman he adored so madly was once Grayson, the man he had called a pervert. I didn't want revenge through blows or screams. I wanted them to destroy each other, piece by piece, in suspicion and pain. I would leave small clues, like breadcrumbs leading prey into a trap. Grayson never wanted to see his father again, the man who had abandoned him for another man. He never wanted to remember his mother, the woman who sold her body to feed him. That would be my first gift to Grayson, a reminder of the past he had tried to bury. I sent a short video, and for the first time in months, I smiled. On the weekend, pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, falling across the phone screen as it buzzed softly. A new notification. I opened the surveillance app, my finger gliding over the screen. The high, clear camera angle covered the entire living room of John and Sarah's home. A few days earlier, I had packed up John's belongings and sent them back to him as a final goodbye. Among them, I had hidden tiny mini cameras, tucked neatly inside the picture frames Sarah had once given him, now hanging around their living room. On the screen, they were tangled together on the sofa, arms and legs entwined, the flicker from the TV casting shifting light over their faces. Lips pressed together, John's hand wandered over Sarah's shoulder. Just as things were about to slip out of control, the doorbell rang, sharp, cutting through the moment. John sighed, clearly annoyed, straightened his shirt, and went to open the door. Sarah lounged back on the sofa, lazily running her fingers through her hair, her eyes glinting with smug satisfaction. I sat in my small apartment, hand tightening around my phone, my lips pressed into a straight line. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Outside the door, an older woman stood, flashy clothes, bright red lipstick stark against her wrinkled face. "Who are you looking for?" John asked curtly, his hand still gripping the doorknob. Sarah rose from the sofa, curiosity pulling her a few steps toward the door, until she froze in place. The woman spoke. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Grayson?" Sarah exhaled in relief, clearly reassured the woman hadn't recognized her. She turned back to the sofa, plopping down and calling out loudly, "Honey, who is it?" John replied dryly, "Wrong address." But the woman wasn't letting it go. She muttered as she dug an old photo from her handbag, its edges worn soft. "This is a picture of Grayson. Take a look. Have you seen him before?" John's brows furrowed as he stared at it. I knew he was remembering. Grayson, the friend he'd lost touch with a decade ago, the one he'd once called a pervert. "You're Grayson's mother?" John asked hesitantly. "Yes," she answered. "Do you know where he is?" John shook his head. "Sorry, I haven't been in contact for a long time. Why are you here?" She frowned, her voice tinged with confusion. "He called me himself. Gave me this address. Why isn't he here now?" I smiled, my finger brushing over the phone screen. I had faked that call, using AI to mimic Grayson's voice, guiding his mother to this exact address. On the screen, Sarah was no longer sitting still. She jumped to her feet, her voice urgent. "Honey, hurry up." But she didn't dare step out, her darting eyes betraying her fear of being recognized. John muttered, "I don't know," and slammed the door, irritation flashing across his face. He turned back, wrapped his arms around Sarah, trying to pick up where they had left off. But I could see the tension on her face, no matter how hard she tried to hide it. Suddenly, Sarah asked, her tone sharp, "Why did you take so long?" John shrugged. "She was looking for an old friend of mine. Haven't spoken in years. Weird she came here." Sarah tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "What friend? Why don't I know about him?" John sighed, his voice dripping with contempt. "We used to be close, but then I found out he was a pervert. Wanted to sleep with your husband. Filthy piece of trash." He didn't notice the blood draining from Sarah's face, her hands trembling where they clenched. She shoved John away, ran into the bedroom, and slammed the door. I switched to the hidden camera in the bedroom, tucked inside an old table lamp. Sarah lay sprawled on the bed, face buried in the pillow, her shoulders shaking with muffled sobs. She wasn't crying from pain. She was crying from humiliation, from having her secret brushed against. John stood in the living room, his face flushed red, clueless as to what he had said to anger her. He didn't go in to comfort her, just muttered under his breath before dropping heavily onto the sofa, rubbing his face in frustration at being left unsatisfied. I picked up another phone, turned on the living room camera, set it aside, and began counting down. Everything was moving in the right direction. 3 minutes later, a man's rough voice growled from outside the door. "What are you doing here?" I clearly heard the woman's sharp reply. "I'm here to see my son." "What about you? What are you doing here?" The man laughed derisively, his tone thick with scorn. "Look at you. Aren't you ashamed? No wonder your son wouldn't want to see you." She snapped back, unwilling to back down. "And you think you're better than me? Sleeping with men all the time? Don't you feel filthy?" The shouting swelled, like two beasts snarling in. The hallway. In the bedroom, Sarah buried her head under the blanket, hands over her ears, pretending to block it out. But I knew she was trembling. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Another man's voice, tight with hostility. "Is Grayson here?" I watched Sarah sit up, cautiously crack open the bedroom door, peeking out. One glance, and she flinched, retreating under the blanket. This man was her father, a man drowning in debt, the last person she ever wanted to face. John, now entirely out of patience, yelled, "Wrong address!" and slammed the door. But Sarah's father didn't leave. He pounded on it, shouting that Grayson had told him to come get money, and if he didn't get it, he wouldn't leave. In the bedroom, Sarah was unraveling. She burst out, her face contorted, screaming at John, "Can't you just get rid of them?" The words poured gasoline on the fire. John exploded, kicking over the coffee table, shards of broken dishes scattering, one piece slicing Sarah's leg. She collapsed onto the sofa, clutching her leg, sobbing. John, even more irritated, grabbed Sarah and dragged her to the door. "Handle it yourself if you're so great," he roared, shoving her outside and slamming the door. I couldn't see the hallway, but I heard Sarah's desperate wails, like a wounded animal. "Honey, I was wrong. Let me in," she pleaded, pounding on the door. It opened, and Sarah rushed into John's arms, sniffling, trying to restore her usual sweet demeanor. She wrapped her arms around him, whispering soft words, thinking the storm had passed. But I knew. The show had only just begun. There were many acts yet to come. Sarah, or Grayson, couldn't outrun her past forever. A few days later, Sarah and John were back home. Sarah shuffled in, her hair a tangled mess, the white bandage stark against her forehead. It turned out she'd been hit in the head with a beer bottle while at the night market. But she flatly refused to let John go after the man, choosing instead to go to the hospital herself to have the wound stitched. Because she knew the drunk man who had mistaken her was none other than Anthony Smith, the owner of the Crimson Star nightclub. Back when she was still Grayson, he had worked as a waiter at the Crimson Star, where the dim lights hid the darkest corners. With fair skin and delicate features, Grayson had caught the eye of Anthony, a man who liked both men and women, always hunting for fresh prey. One night, Anthony grabbed Grayson's chin, forced a few glasses of hard liquor down his throat, the reek of alcohol clinging to every breath. Then, without warning, he raped Grayson right there in the private room. Afterward, he threw $25,000 onto the table, his voice hoarse. "Come with me." Grayson, desperate at the time to save enough for gender reassignment surgery, nodded. According to a former co-worker of Grayson's, Anthony had a sick fetish. He liked being seen. He would often drag Grayson into the private room mid-shift, regardless of who was around, just to degrade him. But Grayson never fought back. He even acted as if he enjoyed it. A year later, Grayson vanished from the Crimson Star without a word. The next day, police raided the club. Anthony was arrested and served more than 6 months in prison. All his assets were seized, and when he got out, he lived off welfare, seething with hatred for Grayson, whom he blamed for his downfall. That encounter at the night market hadn't been an accident. I had sent Anthony an anonymous message with a photo of Sarah, hinting that Grayson had been lurking around the market. Even drunk, Anthony recognized her instantly. Grayson's face, altered but still bearing the marks of the past. He charged toward her, beer bottle in hand, roaring, "Grayson, die for me!" Those words, sharp as a blade, were enough to keep Sarah and John awake all night. Even injured, Sarah was given no rest by John. He stood in the corner of the living room, his eyes cold, predatory, like a beast sizing up its prey. I zoomed in on the feed, not wanting to miss a single detail. After a long silence, John finally spoke, his voice low and cutting. "What's your relationship with Grayson?" Sarah dodged, trying to soften him with a syrupy tone. "I've never even heard of this person. Honey, I'm so tired." But John wouldn't let it go. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as if fitting together pieces of suspicion in his mind. Then why did someone mistake you for Grayson? Why did Grayson's parents come here? Sarah yanked her hand away, but John held tight, not letting her slip free. Her eyes reddened, panic flashing clear. "I don't know, honey, you're hurting me." John released her, but as soon as she turned to run for the bedroom, he suddenly shoved her down onto the sofa. "What are you doing?" Sarah cried out, her voice cracking with fear. John didn't answer. He knelt, quickly pulling off her socks with a deliberate grip. He took her right foot in his hand, turned the sole upward. There, beneath her little toe, was a small dark mole, tiny enough to overlook, but not to John's eyes. "Even the mole is in the same place as Grayson's," he snarled. "Who the hell are you?" Sarah bowed her head, a single tear slipping down her cheek, catching the light. She sighed, her voice tinged with wounded sadness. "I'm Grayson's twin sister." She lifted her gaze, eyes brimming, voice trembling. "Back then, after you rejected him, Grayson tried to take his own life. His final wish was for me to take his place in loving you. John, please, never leave me, okay?" Her story was full of holes, but they struck straight at John's gullibility. He froze, his face softening as if stunned by that feigned sincerity. They pulled each other into the bedroom. I set my phone down, my stomach twisting at the thought of the sounds spilling from that room. But I didn't stop. The storm was coming, and I would be the one standing outside, watching it wipe everything clean. 1 week later, a rumor reached John's mother. The rumor, of course, was planted by my people. She immediately called her son. John, tangled up with Sarah in bed, answered irritably when the call cut in. "What is it?" he snapped, his voice husky, clearly displeased. Sarah lay against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder, stroking him gently as if to soothe him. Mrs. Carter's voice dropped into a sharp, conspiratorial tone, as if sharing a grave secret. "You two may have just registered your marriage, but you've been together long enough. When are you going to have children?" I couldn't help but let out a dry, quiet laugh in my empty room. Children? Sarah, or Grayson, how could she possibly have children? On the screen, Sarah's face stiffened, her eyes flashing with panic. She clutched John's shoulder, shaking her head slightly, pleading with her eyes. John, taking the cue, quickly said, "Mom, let us enjoy our time as just the two of us for a few more years, okay? If you want to take care of a kid, I'll ask Sophie to let Emma stay with you for a few days." At the mention of Emma, my chest tightened as if gripped by an invisible fist. My daughter was still in the hospital, her tiny body hooked to IV lines, yet John and his family hadn't even asked about her. Now he was using her as a shield. I gripped my phone harder. I want a healthy child, not one sick in a hospital bed. Mrs. Carter's voice was ice over the line. I froze, my breath catching. So that was how she had always thought of Emma, as a burden, as something flawed. Before, she had hidden it well, her false smile convincing me she loved my daughter. Now that the truth was out, I couldn't help but wonder, was she somehow involved in Emma's accident? John rubbed his forehead, his tone sharp. "Fine." Before hanging up, Mrs. Carter added, "This afternoon I'm taking Sarah for a checkup to prepare for pregnancy." Sarah's panic was obvious, muttering something about being busy with work, trying to dodge it. But I knew. She might avoid it today, but not forever. 3 days later, Mrs. Carter showed up at John's door, her face set, giving Sarah no chance to refuse. Sarah put on a fearless front, walking lightly after her to the car. At the same time, my phone buzzed. A deep voice said, "Sophie, the hospital is ready." I replied coldly, "Follow the plan." Sarah had paid off a doctor, but she didn't know that I had arranged for someone to play that doctor. Everything was moving forward exactly like a perfectly staged play. After a series of tests, the fake doctor handed Mrs. Carter the results, his tone serious. "Mrs. Carter, your daughter-in-law is infertile." Mrs. Carter nearly toppled from her chair, clutching her chest, her face pale. In the waiting room, Sarah, thinking her scheme had worked, sat with her legs crossed, a smug smile curling her lips. But then Mrs. Carter burst in, grabbed a fistful of her hair, and slapped her hard across the face. You liar!" she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. Sarah clutched her face, stunned. "Mother, what are you talking about?" Mrs. Carter, her whole body shaking, pointed at her. "You're a freak! A transgender!" The words hit just as John walked in. He froze, his brows knitting. "Mom, what are you saying?" Mrs. Carter crumpled to the floor, sobbing. "God, your wife is a man!" Sarah's face drained of color, her eyes wide with fear. She stammered, It's not like that." I stood not far away, a mask hiding my cold smile, my heart pounding with the thrill of victory. John, still trying to hold on to reason, asked again, "Is there some kind of mistake?" The fake doctor stepped forward, his voice steady. "Sir, if you doubt it, you can go to another hospital for confirmation. But I swear on my career, this patient has undergone gender reassignment surgery." John staggered, his eyes fixed on Sarah, his teeth grinding. "Is it true?" Sarah snapped out of her daze, dropped to her knees, clutching his legs, sobbing. "Honey, it's not true. I can explain." But John had lost control. "Explain what?" he roared, kicking her hard in the chest. Sarah fell back, clutching herself, but still scrambled up to grab his pant leg. "Honey, don't leave me. We're happy. I've done everything for you." She repeated through sobs. "You even said I was amazing." John barked, "Shut up," and kicked her again. Her makeup smeared, her face a wreck, twisted and pitiful. "I'm asking you, are you Grayson?" The name came out of John's mouth laced with visceral disgust. Sarah turned her face away, her lips bitten so hard they bled, her eyes glittering with panic and despair. Then her gaze locked on me, standing quietly in the corner, a mask covering half my face. "Sophie." She lunged forward, yanking the mask off, her face twisted with rage. "What are you doing here? I know it now. It's all you're doing, isn't it?" I didn't flinch, only curled my lips into a cold smirk, my voice flat. "That's right." Sarah screamed, spinning toward John, who stood frozen like a statue in the middle of the room. "Honey, it's all her. She's the one who set me up. She's the one who hurt me." John stepped forward, shock in his eyes turning into hatred as he looked at me. "Sophie, you deliberately tried to split me and Sarah apart, making up this ridiculous excuse, thinking I'd come back to you? Dream on." I looked at him, the stupidity in his eyes almost making me laugh. "John, you need to get your brain checked," I said, my voice as sharp as a blade. John raised his hand to slap me, his eyes red with insult. But before it could land, another hand, rough and powerful, clamped around his wrist. Anthony, his gaze icy, stood there, staring at Sarah. "You bastard, I finally found you," he snarled, voice thick with hate. Sarah shrank back, her face paling. John, still clueless, turned to me with a sneer. "Sophie, you even hired someone to trick me?" I gave a cold laugh. "Trick you? You slept with your own best friend. Doesn't that feel familiar?" "What the hell are you talking about?" John roared, but Anthony didn't give him the chance. He pointed at Sarah, his voice gravelly. "I'm here to settle the score with her." Sarah stepped back, her eyes darting to John for help, but he only stood there, torn between suspicion and confusion. Anthony moved in, grabbing a fistful of Sarah's hair, forcing her to lift her head. "Grayson, you were wrong. Please forgive me," she pleaded, her voice choking. "Forgive you!" Anthony bellowed. "You ratted to the cops about my club, got me thrown in prison. I fed you. I spent so much money on you, and this is how you repay me?" John made a move to protect Sarah, but Anthony pulled out a stack of photos and flung them to the floor. Old shots of Grayson in a wig, wearing dresses, heavy makeup, posing in degrading ways for the camera. John stared at them, his face draining of color, his hand trembling as he picked one up. Even after surgery, the resemblance to Grayson was undeniable. 7, 8 parts the same. He turned to Sarah, his eyes like blades. "Grayson, you disgust me." Sarah collapsed, tears spilling down her face, her expression twisted in pain. She loved John with an obsession, but hearing disgusting from his mouth was like tearing her heart in two. Suddenly, she snapped, driving her elbow into Anthony's stomach, making him buckle. Sarah snatched the knife from his hand and in an instant had John in her grip, the blade pressed to his throat. "Don't come closer!" Sarah screamed, pinning John, their heights almost equal, leaving him no room to fight back. "You freak! Let me go!" John shouted, his voice breaking with fear. Sarah leaned to his ear, whispering, "Honey." "Don't call me that. It's disgusting," John yelled back, his face flushed, the knife in Sarah's hand pressed tighter, a thin red line beating on his neck. "Don't, Grayson. Calm down." John trembled, his voice starting to falter. "I'm not Grayson," Sarah screamed, pushing the knife in deeper, her eyes burning red. "Sarah! You're Sarah! Didn't you say you loved me? Let me go, okay?" John tried to bargain, his tone softening. Sarah laughed through her tears, her voice bitter. "You once said you loved me, even divorced for me. So why do you call me disgusting now? I love you madly, and just because I changed, you don't love me anymore?" Her love, warped and suffocating, made my skin crawl. John, arrogant and selfish, only ever loved appearances. When I gave birth to Emma and my body changed, he belittled me and ran to Sarah. Now, finding out Sarah was Grayson, he was repulsed. He only ever loved himself. John's mother wailed, begging Sarah to let her son go, but her words dripped with venom. "If you hurt my son, I'll make sure the whole world knows every filthy thing you've done. I'll hunt down your parents." John tried to stop her, but it was too late. Sarah plunged the knife into his thigh. "My son!" Mrs. Carter screamed, just as Grayson's parents appeared in the doorway. "Grayson!" his mother called, her voice breaking. Sarah turned away, muttering, "I'm not Grayson. I'm Sarah." Grayson's mother stepped forward gently. "Grayson, how did you become like this?" His father's gaze shifted from probing to stunned to regretful before he slammed his fist into his own thigh. "You shame me," Sarah screamed, pointing at him. "It's all your fault. You didn't even like women, yet you tricked my mother into having me, then ran off with a man." She turned to her mother. "And you? You could have earned money anyway, but you chose to sell your body. Since I was a child, I've never been able to hold my head up all because of you two." Her mother stepped closer, her voice soft. "Sarah, you are Sarah. Put the knife down. Whether you're a man or a woman, I'll stand by you. What I did before was wrong. I'm not in that business anymore. Come home with me, please." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming. "I can't turn back. For this man, She hesitated. Seeing her soften, John rushed to speak. "Sarah, I'll give you money. Go home with your mom. Find someone else to be with. Just let me go, okay?" But before he could finish, he screamed. Sarah's hand had gripped his crotch, her eyes icy. "You're filth anyway. Even hurt your own child." She glanced at me with a bitter smile. "Sophie, your daughter's injury, he planned it. Let me take care of this trash, and we'll call it even." I answered evenly. "No deal. You hurt my child. Let the law handle you." Hearing my words, Sarah seemed to awaken. She gave a bitter laugh, then bent to kiss John's cheek, her voice soft but laced with poison. "Honey, want to go to hell with me?" John panicked. "I don't." "You're insane. Let me go." Sarah shook her head. "Do you know how much that surgery hurt? You never pitied me. If you can't love me, then this time you can try being a woman yourself." She raised the knife, driving it hard into her own hand that was clutching John. He screamed, his face going white. Sarah pulled the knife free and struck again. John's mouth hung open, his breathing ragged, as if all hope had drained from him. I stood there, my heart cold, but I didn't look away. This was the price they had to pay. Police sirens ripped through the silence. Sarah, the knife still pressed to John's throat, stood frozen in the middle of the wrecked room. The officers shouted, ordering her to drop the weapon, but she only laughed, a twisted smile, her eyes glinting with madness. "I am not Grayson," she screamed, her voice breaking apart. A single gunshot rang out, sharp and dry, and Sarah fell. The bullet lodged squarely in her forehead. She collapsed, but her eyes stayed wide open, fixed on John, brimming with a mix of longing and hatred. John was rushed to the hospital, blood spreading across the floor, his face pale, his breath rapid. The doctors shook their heads after examining his injury. Sarah's 2 knife strikes, brutal and precise, had taken away his ability to be a man. I heard the news from a nurse friend, and for a moment, I thought it was a fitting price. But then the image of Emma, lying motionless in the hospital, flashed in my mind, and I knew true justice had yet to be served. A week later, the police arrested John. They found that the window from which Emma had fallen showed no signs, no scratch marks, no struggle, nothing like the instinctive actions of a 7-year-old fighting to save herself. Neighbors recounted that they'd heard Emma scream that day, "Daddy, no!" Another neighbor confirmed seeing Sarah enter the house with John and Emma, but after the incident, she vanished as if she had never been there. The police recovered messages between John and Sarah, each line a blade to my chest. Sarah had written, "Just thinking about you having a child with her makes me feel so sick. Honey, can you make Emma disappear? Later we can have our own baby. I don't want you to share your love with another child," she added. "Besides, if my parents find out you already have a kid, they won't invest in our company." To prove his loyalty, John had replied simply, "I'll take care of it in a few days." I read those words over and over, tears running down my face, not from pain, but from pure hatred. Emma, my daughter, had been seen by her own father as nothing more than an obstacle. After his arrest, John initially refused to confess. He even played the role of the grieving father, crying in agony in the interrogation room. But when all the evidence was laid out, he immediately shifted all the blame onto Sarah. The public outrage online was explosive. Posts on X spread like wildfire. People called John human trash and demanded the death penalty without mercy. John was ultimately convicted. The trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. When the judge read the sentence, he sat there, head bowed, stripped of the arrogance of the man who once called me useless. I didn't attend the trial. I had no desire to see his face again. Instead, I sat by Emma's bed in a California hospital, holding her hand, whispering, "We did it, my love. Justice is ours." Emma still hadn't woken, but I believed she could hear me, somewhere deep in her sleep. I smoothed her hair as the afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, warm like a promise. The play had ended, but the journey for me and my daughter was only just beginning.